Dear employee, what do you think? Hello, this is Kelsey Palmer, and I'm going to be presenting an article about employee opinion. I will specifically be talking about this in terms of surveying. As a brief overview, I will give an introduction on the article I chose. I will relate the article to our text, specifically touching on the Hawthorne effect and studies. I will go through the article in terms of discussion points, as well as a counter-article written as a letter to the editor, and finally, some future research ideas. The article titled Managing, Asking Workers What They Think was written in the New York Times by a Claudia H. Dutch. The article talks about the need for surveying, whether or not the survey is worth the money and resources to perform it, and what should or could be done with the results. Let's return to the social person era and to the Hawthorne study. As a reminder example, think back to the illumination study conducted by an electrical engineering professor at MIT. Production of employees who performed coal winding operations were monitored under different light levels with hope that as the lighting in the room increased, productivity would directly respond. Among other studies, the hypothesis continued that production was related to the environment they were in. While that may be true, there are far too many variables to adjust. So one conclusion that could be made, after a consistent rise in productivity no matter what the environment, is that productivity is related to the employees being monitored. This conclusion led to improvement of managerial supervision techniques, as well as coining the term Hawthorne effect. A modern way to think of this, beyond supervision, but more in terms of attention, is surveys. Attention and time is an expensive thing to give, so outside of production lines, how does one pay attention to employees? How does one attend to their thoughts or needs and use that data gathered to increase productivity? So surveying, in terms of this article, is the answer. So let's dive into the article. 3 of the companies that are talked about include hospitals in Danbury, Connecticut, and their desire to reduce healthcare costs for their employees and for the company as a whole. J.P. Morgan and their interest if their internal communications are sufficient, and the Mobile Corporation and if their complaints about relocation, childcare, and performance appraisals are legitimate. For all of them, an employee survey was the solution. The author gives a bit of background on surveying, however. She didn't cite her facts, so I'm calling them loose. Dutch talks about a survey performed to see if companies use surveys. Talk about survey inception. Of the 200 companies polled, only 49% or less actually performed surveys. However, 97% of those chief executives said that they think surveys would be useful for their company. Another bit of background information that Dutch did not cite was that surveys can cost up to $400,000. I would suppose that for a small company, SurveyMonkey would suffice. But for a larger company, an expensive third-party consultant could rack up the bill. One good point the author does make, in my opinion, is that she addresses whether you pay for the survey now or pay for the problems of not surveying later. More on the next slide about that. I mentioned not surveying could be an expensive route. 2 hospitals were discussed in this article. One hospital changed their healthcare benefits without consulting their employees. The employees disliked the changes so much that they had to change it back. So the expense of the human resources time, training time, paperwork printing, and likely insurance plan coding added up against them, only to turn around and pay all those expenses once more to change it back. A second hospital, though they thought they knew what their employees would prefer, surveyed them anyway. Turns out their predictions were wrong, and they saved all those expenses and time that the first hospital did not. In the example of the J.P. Morgan group in the article, a member of the management team was concerned that their internal communication system was not good enough. Upon surveying, the senior VP found out that his employees thought the system was just fine. The author concludes that with this example, surveys can confirm good things, but they can also confirm bad things. The third company researched was Mobile. Mobile was receiving a few complaints about relocation policies, childcare, and performance appraisal. Upon surveying, the company found that there were even more prominent complaints within the company than they thought, encouraging them to make some changes. At the end of the article, Dutch writes about the problems that can arise from surveying employees. Most importantly, she points out that confidentiality cannot be stressed enough. In an article written by Pamela Hunter, the director of the Center for Survey Research and Analysis at the University of Connecticut, the difference between confidentiality and anonymity was discussed. To quote the difference, anonymity suggests that the answers to a questionnaire cannot be traced back to the actual respondent. Confidentiality, however, means that the answers can be connected to a specific person. But the respondent's identification will not be divulged to the wrong people. She goes on to discuss that anonymity releases the respondent from caring as much about their answers. Confidentiality, then, can be used by a third party, like SurveyMonkey. It can be traced to a person for feedback, but not given out to inappropriate peers. A final note is that the company must use the data provided by the survey. If employees are asked about work conditions, they give an honest answer on a survey, and yet nothing changes, employees will assume that the employer just doesn't care. In a letter to the editor regarding Dutch's article, a writer expressed their disagreement that productivity and satisfaction were related. The writer went on to say that if you are concerned with the morale and attitude within your company, you should do a survey about employee satisfaction. However, if you're interested in productivity, you should do a survey specifically about the employee's thoughts on management techniques and company culture. This writer's thoughts still fall under Hawthorne effect, but I think that it hits the nail on the head in terms of the content of the survey. I created a set of graphs to show the writer's opinion on what affects what in terms of satisfaction. Some thoughts on further research into the topic of surveying as a management tactic include comparing the letter to the editor's thoughts to other management theories beyond the Hawthorne effect. I like that their writing inspired me to create a visual of cause and effects relationship. I'd also be interested in finding some real data on survey efficiency. And finally, this article seemed to focus on big business examples. I wonder how surveys come into play in small businesses or organizations. I've taken them, but I've never given them, and I've certainly never read their response. And here are my references. Thank you for your time and your attention.